Where? Why? Welcome to the Headhunted podcast. Motivation, inspiration, drive, hunger. For those who dare, for those who triumph. You were born to be Headhunted.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next episode of the Headhunted podcast. Today we're going to be talking about hiring, we're going to be talking about recruiting, we're going to be talking about headhunting. Greg Savage once said, hire an attitude, not just experience or qualification. And Bill Gates once said, the key for us, number one, has always been hiring very smart people. About smart people, about hiring people, about recruitment, about hiring attitude. I'm going to be talking with a very close friend of mine, Jarda Němec.
Headhunted.
Welcome to the show.
Hello, Michael.
Hi. Jarda has become the first Czech Republic Egon Zehnder representative in 2019. Before, you had a 15 years of experience in finance. Recently in Microsoft, or the latest in Microsoft. Then you left Microsoft and you decided to join headhunting and you decided to become the top headhunter in the Czech Republic for one of the top firms. How does this happen? I mean, you just don't work in finance for 15 years. PricewaterhouseCoopers, Ford, Microsoft CE, and then you don't become a headhunter. Well, you do.
Yeah, no, there's a story behind that. And I should probably start and flip it backwards to whether I am actually a finance person, because somewhere at the beginning of my life and career, I was far from it. I would always consider finance boring stuff and never really got close to it. So, and you know me well. So somewhere in the past, as a boy out of Litvínov, which is a small town where everybody plays hockey, so I had to play hockey. And I thought I was going to be a hockey player for a little bit. And then that ended quickly. Then I went to school, and I was fortunate enough when I went to university, the Berlin Wall collapsed and the communism was suddenly gone. And so I started exploring the world and seeing what else can I do beyond the small town where I was coming from. And I discovered science. And I was fortunate enough that I went to the university that at that time Ostrava was the sort of a spirit of freedom. And we certainly enjoyed it in the first 2 years of the studies. And I had to repeat at least 1 year of that study because I was enjoying it too much. And so I turned into a scientist at the very beginning. And then for a brief period of time, being 8 years, I thought I was going to be a scientist. And then I got weary of science. And then I was looking forward to what to do next, right? And at that time, I knew a head of a Mensa in the Czech Republic. And he told me, well, you are a smart guy. You're a little bit old, because at that time I was 32. And he was like, well, why don't you try and go to the Big Four and see if they might hire you? And so I stumbled into PricewaterhouseCoopers. And suddenly I got the label of a finance officer, finance expert.
So it was at the age of 32 or something like that, right?
Yeah, no, I started late.
Wow. I was just doing a podcast today with a guy who's joined BCG when he was 23. I mean, they work your ass off, so to say.
Yeah, and at that time I was still trying to contemplate what can be done in the field of science and still enjoying a part-time schedule of a PhD student and traveling the world in summer. And at the end of the day, even when I reflect back to it, I think part of the reason why I end up being at Egon Zehnder and being happy at Egon Zehnder had something to do with me traveling the world and being a small cosmopolitan, as I like to call it. Because I came from a sort of a humble background of the family. And you go through the experiences of different countries and different jobs and small jobs, and suddenly you look differently on education. You start to value people because you sort of understand that having a reliable dishwasher of a Brazilian origin in a restaurant in one of the most expensive restaurants on the East Coast of the United States is superbly important person at that time. And you need that person, and so does the enterprise, right? So that was me. Yes, I did a little bit of a science. Then I joined PwC. And there I, was labeled as a finance expert. And then I for a brief period of time, I went to Telefonica O2.
Right.
And right across the street was Microsoft. And so I joined Microsoft. And
what did you do until you were 32 years old? I'm missing, there's a gap.
I was a lazy student and someone who would always enjoy the time outside of school, primarily. And then school was always fun. I was, when I look at it backwards, I think I was what we now call the curiosity-driven animal.
Right.
Because I was like a sponge. You just give me an information and I soak it right in.
You still are.
Yeah, to a degree, yes. That's still there. And I just enjoy it. And then it took me a little longer versus the others to finish it. I mean, even the PhD I extended by a year. So it all boils down to year of 2002, so technically I was 31 something, where I joined PwC, which was really also funny. I was by far the oldest one in the starting class.
You started as an analyst at the lower position.
Well, you go the traditional journey. So you go there, what is it called? You associate, but senior associate, assistant manager. I don't remember the rankings, but basically there is a very hierarchical pyramid where you go from the bottom up.
And then you decide to quit and you join O2 and...
Well, it was interesting because it was what I like to call a forced quitting, right? Because
Is that a headhunting term?
No. That is how I felt at that time, because it was that I got promoted ahead of a schedule. And when you are at the PwC, you sort of need to go through a certain curriculum of education, right? They have ACCA, and then you need to study the statutory auditor, right? And I saw the book, and then I was like, I love the analytics. I like the conversation. I finally understand what the financial statements are trying to tell me. But I wasn't ready, and I wasn't cut out for studying the book. It was like,
well, you're a scientist. You're a PhD guy. I mean, usually these guys take these.
Yeah, but this was, to me at least, I felt that this is like learning a poem where you need to memorize it word by word in order to make a decision and then make a quick reference. So to me, it suddenly became more of a legal job than really smart analytics. It will always be part of it. But I just said, look, I don't necessarily want to sacrifice weekends and summers and to study that kind of a book, because I don't know if you know, and I'm sure some of the audience will know, when you join, I think, any of the big four, and it could be consultancy, it could be auditing firms, they have something like a season in a year where you basically, I think, if I remember it well, from 1st of November until like the 30th of April, you were not allowed to take a day off, or at least it wasn't suggested. Now, I think the times are changing these days with millennials being in the workforce. But at that time, it was a somewhat strict requirement, so not much of a skiing done.
And then O2 and then Microsoft. Right? How does one show up in Microsoft at the age of 30? What at the time, 35? No, 34.
That's a good question. How did I end up in there? I think, well, I was a part of a group, and there was a CFO club at that time, and I went to certain presentations. I sort of wanted to make sure I stay updated on the terms. And I think I joined Telefonica O2 in interesting times. But also somewhat unfortunate times, right? Because it was at the time where Telefonica took the stake, then O2 came in, and it was really odd setting, right? And I think everybody was expecting layoffs and restructuring, etc. And I joined internal audit, and I thought the function of internal audit would be a lot more consultative rather than controlling. So this was not, again, it was not much of a clicking that I saw in there. And I don't think I'm sure. I met the CFO of Microsoft at that time, a gentleman called Dave Clark.
Was it exactly? I met him.
Yeah, he was a Yankee guy. And I liked Dave.
He was there for a couple of years, right?
Okay. And Dave, to me, was what I discovered as a true Yankee in the most positive sense of the word. Because remember, I was raised in communism, right, until the age of 18, and to us, the Yankees were those that were always ready to attack, and they would take everything away from us. And then I show up in the U.S. It was early 90s. I went for a small jobs there, and I saw people having second job and third job and working 16 hours a day and not complaining. Right? And I saw some of the most hardworking students of the universities that I have seen in my life. And I said, well, what is this? Nobody told me that, right? And I saw that in Dave. Dave was very honest and hardworking person. And we spoke for a little bit, and then they had an opening, and I told him, look, maybe I'll be interested. He was asking me.
All right.
And so I joined. And because he saw something in me, I didn't necessarily saw it. And I loved the company. I mean, people can say weird things about Microsoft. I think it gave me an opportunity to see how the bigger picture works. I found very talented people there. I found an environment, if somebody tells you that Microsoft was or is corporate, I remember coming to work in shorts and flip-flops. Right? And I was a deputy CFO or interim CFO and still be okay.
Steve Ballmer once crashed my office, screaming at me. I was wearing shorts and I was wearing a T-shirt. It was in November. And he's like, Michal, you didn't get the memo. I was like, what memo, Steve? And he's like, it's the winter. You should be wearing pants. That was the only bad comment I had ever received on my wardrobe. And,
No, and there was a good degree of freedom, and I always felt, and I was fortunate to have a good leaders, at least early on in the career, I must say, who there was general consensus, like, here's a target, here's a goal. You pick and choose the road less traveled if you choose so, and you go with it, right? And it was fun. They foster sort of a sense of belonging, and I think the GMs were fun to have. I remember some really good HRs. Some of them are still with the firm, and so there was a good chemistry. And I felt that there were some values that were close to what I was.
Who was the GM at the time?
Jane Gilson.
Jane Gilson, nice.
She is now, I think, with Google or someone else. She was a superbly charismatic woman. I remember her walking into our office. We had that little balloon that, you're supposed to fix your back if you sit on it on day. And she was jumping on. It's like, guys, how is the quarter looking like? and that was our GM. One office next to us was Jack Mulfight, and so we would get early dose in the morning of what the world is talking about. Right, he would always come from running. He already had the RSS feed, and those were the good discussions. I remember good times. Right.
So it was 10 years there, right? And then you decided to leave the company, and you took some time off.
I took a sabbatical.
Right.
Best decision of my life. I think I still have it on the LinkedIn.
Nice. I think you do as a CEO, Chief Entertaining Officer.
That's
family
exactly,
or something
that's exactly what I was.
Something like that, right?
Employed by family, and that's exactly what it was.
My family CEO, exactly.
I was fortunate and thankful enough to Microsoft when we part ways that we've done it in a very civilized and respectful manner, and I could afford that. This was a great time. I think that. I keep telling everyone that if you can afford that luxury, you should have it somewhere in that CV. And anytime I talk to people, you could almost tell if people have some breaks in between the jobs because you get rested. That the brain certainly gets an impulse, and then the neuroscience proves it that you again, like a sponge, you suddenly figure it out that you miss certain information, and you are still capable of getting those information and carry on.
But you cannot spend that having chatting online and spending on social media, and so you really have to set your mind free, and then it works.
Yeah, and I was probably fortunate at that time. The Netflix was not that high,
right?
And Twitter would not and Facebook probably wouldn't take all of your time. Not that it is taking time now, but
6 months off, and then you land an excellent job that usually takes 6 to 12 months to even find. How does this happen, and why headhunting? You've built so much expertise in finance, corporate finance, and so on, and in HQ finance, I should have said, and then comes this opportunity. Or was it an opportunity? Or how did you come around Egon Zehnder?
So again, that's typical me. Because there's always a bit bizarre twist to it. I did what I felt at that time was the right thing to do, and what I often see now people that I work with doing the exact same thing. So I sat down and I said, well, I have the logical brain available to me, and let's use it. So I sat down, went online, and say, well, if I want to get and go further with a career, what would that mean? Who could help me in that? I call the friends, and I quickly figure it out. There is such a thing as a top 5 executive search and leadership advisory firms. I look at who is here, who is in CE, where they are located. And I went to them with a sort of a bizarre and not really thoughtful story. I basically told them, look, I'm sick and tired of being CFO. I literally remember having a sort of a psychosomatic reaction where you would bring a quarterly review pack in front of me. I would, in 5 seconds, figure it out where are the 3 problems.
Right.
But then I know I was ready for a 1 week long debate and 12 hours on the conference calls. And I said, I don't want any of that. Right? So I went to the Big 5 and I told them, look, ideally I would do something where I could leverage what I know and yet learn something new. And ideally, this would not be a CFO role or HQ controlling, etc. And I remember clearly that I immediately felt the difference of how I was treated in different offices by different people. So it wasn't that, it wouldn't be the brand of the person, or not the person, but the firm that I was talking, it would be the person, whether that would click, whether they would listen or not. And I felt that many were there and not really listening. For them, I was a salary divided by 3, and that's a potential fee that you can place with a client and sort of having it rewarded in the effort if you put Jarda somewhere.
Is that divided by 3 or multiple?
Yeah, well, it's divided mostly for the annual compensation.
For the annual.
Yeah, and it will sit somewhere in between.
But usually, let me stop you there. Usually, don't approach headhunters, especially not those top 5 or top 4 firms. You don't. Do you put yourself in a position of not a desperation, but a need for help? Usually, you're being headhunted by guys. How does it work the other way? It also connects to the question we're going to have forward. How does one make himself or herself visible for a headhunter? But don't you lose credibility? Don't you lose value approaching headhunters like that?
You're asking the right question. A guy that is 10 years older versus the experience. Because I sort of didn't have that meaning. I checked with those that have used the services, and they said, look, you make sure you're associated with the best, because the best can get you what you're looking for, right? So that was my starting point. And I saw, okay, so this is what they do. And then I look at the websites, and then clearly stated, right? If you are interested in career transition, we are here. We are the consultants. We provide career coaching. So I didn't necessarily have that hesitation. I said, well, then let's go see them. Let's see what they're going to say. And I must say that 90% of those conversations were meaningful. I think the people were able to quickly decode what I was saying, where my experience was, what I could do or couldn't do. What I didn't understand at that time, I made the task extremely difficult for them, because the sort of intra-job transition into a completely different vertical, aka taking a ex-CFO-like profile into a business development or
you were not heading for the headhunted role.
No.
You were just heading for everything but CFO.
I think my storyline at that time was like, ideally we stay away from the CFO, right? But then, some weeks later, I would be receiving phone calls, and it would be all going in the same direction. Right? And I actually went to see. So I was in Vienna, I was in Munich, I was in Berlin, because many of the top fives were not here at that time. So I need to travel a little bit, and I was always referenced and sent to present myself for the roles that were heading back to where I was. It was sort of a regional finance lead role for one of the ICT giants, and I can't name them for now. But it was always similar. And I remember with one of them, I got really close to actually saying, well, this makes sense. Yeah, it would be interesting to do. And then I had this moment in the conversation where I said, you just told me you were through the half-year review. Can I look at it? How do you do? Because they basically portrayed it as we the startup, we the new gen, right?
Yeah.
And I said, can I see how you do the half-year review? And boy, I received the exact same deck that we were looking at Microsoft, and 17 or 50 minimum plus pages, 120,000
numbers. We went through that.
And I said, that's exactly what I was running away from. Right? And so I actually talked to the guy on the other table, your guy is, and then I gave him a name of my friend at CHQ. Now I kind of regret it, because it's funny when the guy landed in there, the stock of that particular company is now, I think, at like 35 more than it was at that time. So I get to see him, and I think he's happy. But again, that made me happy. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I didn't take that one. And going back to where I actually ended, I met the office lead here in Prague, and Marta was her name, Kowalska Maradan. I felt that she was the best listener of all. So we were having a conversation, and then at the end of the conversation, she said, well, I check a few references, and the references are telling me that you are not a traditional CFO. And as a matter of fact, you were wasting your time a little bit in the CFO space, because you could do with people, you are quick and you have this consultative thing. So what other choices would you consider, right? And I said, well, I can't be a GM. I don't have an experience for that. I don't, necessarily want to do HR. Again, no experience. And then she was like, well, would you want to be one of us?
Interesting.
Yeah, and the first thing interesting was my first reaction. My second reaction was, what's wrong with this firm? And I remember, sort of using it as an icebreaker when I went through the interviews later with Egon Zehnder. I had no clue. Literally, for me, executive search was like extended arm of HR. Right?
Was there a opening, or was she going to create one for you?
Man, that's a good question. You probably need to ask Marta. We never really talked about it. I think she mentioned something. She had me on the radar, and then she felt in something when I was sitting there, right? And I think what sort of convinced her, because when we were at the end of the discussion, she was asking me, like, whether I read books, right? And I said, yes, I repaid the debt.
I know you do.
And the 6 months of my sabbatical, I didn't do anything else but reading.
I know.
Literally, I took all the magazine and books. And she was like, well, we have books that are written by our partner, one of the founders. And she said, well, it goes about how we hire people, how we see potential, et cetera. Would you be interested to read it? And I said, yeah. I said, I'll give you 2. Pick one, and then you call me. And I remember that really well. It was Thursday, 2:00 in the afternoon. And she said, once you're done reading it, call me back. And if you be still interested, then we're going to start the whole hiring process.
Interesting.
And I call her Friday at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. I said, well, I read both books. And so she was like, that's interesting. Did you like the books? To which I said, well, I liked one. The other one, I felt that the themes were repeated a little bit. And she was like, well, then let's start the hiring process, because I think the similar thing, right? And so that was the beginning of that. And I think I said, okay, primarily because I really like the books, right? And it would describe all the human errors, the interactions, and some of the intellectual curiosity that, I found interesting in the process. And I said, well, why not, right? And then Martha was like, well, so let me explain to you what's going to happen next, right? Again, I had no clue. And to which she said, well, we a little religious about how we hire people, right? So technically speaking, you got to have a double degree, whether that's MBA and a PhD, that will be one. Second, we always tried for the CXO experience, lasting of minimum certain level of years.
As a headhunter?
Yep. Yeah,
interesting.
Because they, the consultative style of Egon Zehnder is the one where the requirement is that you sort of are quick in understanding the needs of the client that stems mostly from a business. And so that there is an assumption that if you have a couple of these things ticked, the chances are that you have some intellectual capacity to carry on the conversation. And so... And then the next thing is she said, well, we're a little religious. So you're probably going to go through 25 plus interviews. You will have to go through 10 plus countries and 3 plus continents to make sure we have a diversity view. But at that time, I was on sabbatical. I was doing nothing else but reading books and magazines and doing sport. I said, yep, well, then let's do it, right?
And for one of the interviews, you also traveled to Canada or US?
I was in the US.
Do I remember
Canada,
correctly? We spoke at a time, so I remember I recall a couple of things. Tell me, how did you sell yourself? As right now, what's happening with COVID and all of these era is that we are receiving a lot of CVs, we as Monster, of guys who've been in one industry, finance or manufacturing and so on for 15, 20 years, and suddenly they lost their job. So they need to be visible by the headhunters and also by the recruiters as somebody else. They want to step outside of the industry or that vertical and so on. How did you sell yourself as a finance guy? I mean, your CV must have had screamed finance. What did you tell? First, I understand once you got your foot into the door, it was easy because you're a talkative guy, well-rounded with all of the expertise and knowledge. But before, how did you get your foot into the door with a finance resume for a non-finance job?
I have no idea. I really don't. And I think when we're going to be talking about, we discuss, what are the transferable skills? Yeah. What we look in terms of competencies and versus the potential of people. I think where it landed with me that I was, and I still am, filled with the curiosity. So, and I talk a lot when we talk, but then I have a discipline to shut up and listen when there's time to shut up and listen. And what I really like on the first interviews, I remember that the first interviews I was sent to Berlin. And what I found really amazing is that I wasn't selling. Right? I felt that we were having conversation, and when half of the time people will try to describe to me what it actually entails to be part of the Egon Zehnder family, what are the requirements. Often they would describe to me like, how does a really shitty day at work look like? And you're going to have a couple of those, right? Just get ready on that. Everybody was stressing, agility, resilience, and some of the tenacity that you're going to need. So the more I talked, I think once I got the number of 10 of the interviews, I felt like I have not met a single person that would not be interesting. One. Two, they were all different. Yeah? And sort of now we talk about diversity and inclusion. I've seen most diverse bunch of leaders that I have seen in my life. They will be coming from different backgrounds, different education, different experiences, yet they had something in common. And there was a little twist, and that something in common, I felt that was a bit of a care for people, right? And I would say that a minimum of 50% of my interview was about who I am as a human being. Rather than, so they quickly said, all right, the CFO, they actually, a number of them said, well, the CV really does not look that impressive.
All right.
Yeah?
All right.
Because, when I look at their CV, I'm like, that's interesting. They even want to talk to me. We have so many Harvard graduates. 1/3 of the firm are former McKinsey, very senior people. Most of the people are CXO from a prior practice and a different experience. So that was it. That was where it started, and some 25 interviews down the road, I was bought in, and I started.
Tell me, how much does ego play or not play when you're recruiting or you're headhunting for let's say, a CEO of a company? And at that moment, it's like a private banker who says, why am I dealing with this guy? Why am I not this guy? Mm-hmm. Does it play in the game where you would place a CEO or CFO or a CX into a company and like, oh, I should be this guy being placed? Like, am I just a service guy? Am I just, a transaction guy? Why am I not the CEO? Does it occur?
It does. And it's no secret that every once in a while we lose a person that goes across the board to the client.
Right.
It doesn't happen in the double-digit numbers in the percentage. Mm-hmm. But, I remember starting with at least 2 people in my class because we always join in sort of waves. And 2 of them are on the CEO's position right now. One heads the HR function of a client, and it does happen. And it's always circumstantial. It has a sort of the outside environment. And I don't think the firm as a concept is in violent disagreement with that. Because at the end of the day, you come from a clan, almost, so to speak, or a group of people that understand each other. And guess what's going to happen? The guy is now CEO. He's going to come back to us in 5 to 10 years because when he's going to be, or he or she's going to be handling bigger things, they will need help and they will go to the trusted partner.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So I was never tempted. I think I was asked 1 or 2 times, but I enjoy the profession so much that I would never go to me.
That's the thing. You must be enjoying the profession. And
it's a wonderful thing, and it's difficult to convince. Well, it's not difficult once you start sort of looking into what it actually entails, and especially on the smaller market, because there's a huge difference if you are Egon Zehnder in Germany or if you are Egon Zehnder here in the Czech Republic. We all collaborate together, but the responsibility for smaller markets brings a joy and a challenge of you being so-called generalist, right? Because you have clients to be served, and you're not necessarily a pharma expert or a financial sector. We always draw on that expertise. There is a practice groups we organize in the matrix, but at the end of the day, you are the partner on the spot for the client, and that's the discussion where you just need to hold it on a certain level, but at the same time, you need to be humble and honest to say, look, I'm not a medical doctor. And if it's a pharma company and R&D, I'm going to bring somebody from within the firm that has that expertise, and we'll carry on. We'll engage the team in Europe or Central Eastern Europe and get things done. But so we get organized and disciplined around the task and the requirements, as long as we understand the requirement really well.
So let's go to the situation where you're headhunting for somebody. You're looking for a CEO of a company. How do you find that person? And what's important for all of the listeners is how do they make themselves visible? So Jarda knows about them. So he knows whom to call. How does this whole process look like from your side? And what should people do or not to do? To be headhunted. There might be somebody now, 15 years old experience, 50 years experience, and then saying, well, I haven't been headhunted ever in my life. What am I doing wrong? What is this Jarda guy and Michal what are they talking about?
Well, I think you put like 10 questions in that, so I'll try to take it per part. This, I always tell the people there's nothing wrong with not being, seen or touched or called by headhunter. Often we see CVs in a career where you can see the career progression, taking the logical steps, and they happen in a time. The people do the right thing for them, for the company, and they, of course, don't need it, right? Because they are known to be good, and they are known to be good within that company. If they do the transfer, it often is connected by internal referencing, etc. So in that same sense, I'm going to use this logic to answer the second question. What should they do? Look, it is our responsibility to know that they are out there and they are good, right? I wouldn't necessarily say there is a task for you to become more visible. if you do your job well and others would know, you will see the market moving. At some point, we will be in conversation with some of the people that do know you. So we foster a network, we build that network, and again, what is it, 60 plus years of Egon Zehnder worldwide, 25 in the country, carries and enriches that network, and it gets bigger each and every year. Now, that is the fundamental thing for us, that, you know, having that network, becoming part of that network is a different thing, and for us, it often is associated with a little bit of a seniority, because we don't serve every level. So yes, ideally we would see the people, you know, higher up in the chain, but that doesn't mean that we would not visit and look for, you know, strategic roles that are, for example, below the CXO level, because if it's important, it could be confidential, it could be something where the company is putting major bets, and they want to make sure that, you know, they apply executive search rather than sort of a transactional headhunting approach. Then you, in the executive search, you want to make sure you're really getting to the best available solution at that condition and that time, right? And that's kind of a commitment that executive search should have to the client, versus, you know, let me replace Jan with Joseph. That sometimes it is also applicable, but we look on things more strategic and more conceptual.
I usually ask the people who are here about how did it happen that they got headhunted. So COO Kiwi was there, and CEO Dáme Jídlo was there, CEO of Chief of Coca-Cola was somewhere else, President of Slovakia, you know, how did he come with the idea of becoming the President of Slovakia? How does it work from the other side? Like, what homework do you do on the person before you call the person? And then what do you tell the person? Hi, this is Jarda from Egon Zehnder. We found you. How does it know? Like, because I never made a call. I received the calls. Yeah, so I know. But what does Jarda do? How do you approach because those guys are very senior, right? To get to them is sometimes very difficult.
And openly, you know, the sort of, if you wear a jersey of Egon Zehnder, it does help, right? Because if you look at the senior level of leadership, they would know who Egon Zehnder is and what they stand for. I don't do anything special. I try to be the humble guy on the phone, and I tell them, look, we might sound we are important people on the planet Earth. At the same time, we have a respect to your accomplishments, and, you know, we've done the homework, and we felt you could be the right guy to talk to, right? And I always remind people that any conversation that we have with them, it's an honest conversation. It's meant to remain confidential, which is why, again, you're not going to hear any names except for my former bosses or the companies, because that's what's treasured most, right? I think the whole industry flies high on trust, and you know how it goes with trust. You gain it in little pieces, and then you suddenly lose it in one big drop. So I think being honest and respectful to the people, being ready to hear no, and being fine with it, and being literally fine with it, not just to say it's like, I respect it, thank you very much. Why is this happening? So that is the key to it. It takes often more than one call. I like to sort of take a measurable steps on how we approach people, because I feel like they need to have a time to consume it. It's not, I would not seek yes or no on an entry conversation. And I had 8 of those today, and all of them are pending. And I could, of course, sense some level of interest. I can also sense some level of disinterest, and I always make myself available for the follow-up. We send them the information, we understand they do the clicking, and so we'll wait. We patiently wait. We try to work with the client to say that, you know, the Rome wasn't built in a week or a day, and it takes time. And we remind everybody there's a value in doing this in sort of a conceptual steps, respectful steps, and be okay without pushing, right? We try not to sell things, right? Because we talk about sport. I think there is a parallel in it, because I honestly believe you build winning teams from those who want to be on the team, right? And you might here and there bring a superstar, but convincing somebody that, look, this is going to be the winning team for you. Some convincing you can do, but it needs to come from within.
By the end, you're presenting Egon Zehnder, and you're probably offering always a better job, better in terms of the people stepping up to a higher role, right? So it makes it easier for you to sell it.
In general, yes.
In general.
There will always be exception to the rule. And again, this goes back to the sort of a theories of Simon Sinek's and similar, where that I think if I were to name one trend that I see now, we get to see more and more senior people who tell us, look, hey, I've done it, I've seen it, I made the money, I had the responsibility of a region and global roles, etc. I want to do something else. I want to have a fun, and I want to have younger people around, etc. And typically, when you say bigger roles and more responsibility, we've been on some of the projects where we, take people down on typically the compensation, right?
Right.
And of course, they wouldn't go into the point where the family would struggle, but they would, sacrifice a little bit of income in exchange for something else that they might be looking for more in their life. And typically, the recipient of the balance trade-off would be family and friends.
Right.
And suddenly you see the happier executive, right? And that, creates a joy when you get to see and talk to these people. And when you take them off, the Germans have the wonderful phrase of Hamsterrad. I don't know how you translate it. It's the guy that runs in that little circle. And if you take that person out and sort of look at it from a different perspective, and somebody then coming back to you is like, I'm glad I did it.
Hey, do headhunters get headhunted? Do you receive calls? Have you received Egon, a call from a different headhunter?
That's a thin ice to step in.
I know.
Yes, I have.
You don't need to answer that.
Yes, I have. There's interesting thing about Egon Zehnder. I don't know if people know. And when I said Egon Zehnder is sort of a strict and almost religious how they hire people.
Sounds to me like McKinsey a bit.
We don't hire from competitors. And literally that, I think up until today.
Interesting.
If out of the 550 consultants in the world, you might find one or two, I don't know, might have done exception in sort of the beyond search and leadership advisory space. But that was always a general rule. Whereas we would feed the market. I mean, even if you look here in the Czech Republic, you would see a good number of 10 of a former Egon Zehnders that are out there and prosperous because they learn the craft, they learn the connectivity, they got their own network, they carries them through it, and they doing what they enjoy. And every once in a while, bump into a name and say, oh, all right, that's the year 2004, Egon Zehnder, Czech Republic. So there are people out there now.
So back to the people right now looking for jobs because COVID has changed a lot and so on. Would they or should they approach headhunters, not exec search or even including exec search? Should they do it themselves? Or what would be your idea about 15 years old, not this small guy, but a senior guy, 15, 20 years of experience, now with the visibility of losing a job or, has lost a job, should he or she approach a headhunter or firms like Egon and, the other Spencer and, the other firms? What should they do?
I think yes. And I'm not saying that because you want to get, to know more. I think it makes sense. And I'll be speaking on behalf of the industry. I think it does make sense,
exactly.
Right? We have a market share and we might be market leader in several markets, etc. But even if you are market leader in this particular domain, there are several others. And I keep reminding people that's your life. It's your career, that's your mortgage, those are your kids in private schools, etc. It's your comfort of living. And it's when you look at for the joy at work, you make sure that you spread the network. So coming to the executive search for a career discussion is absolutely the right thing to do. I always tell people, well, make sure you have some basic trust into the organization and the people. Because as with everything else, there's different people, there's different profiles on the market. And I think, especially for those who have a job and they still plan to keep it, they just don't know whether it's going to go somewhere. There is a certain confidentiality that needs to stay in place.
Still, the Czech market is very small, right? So if somebody goes to 4 main headhunting companies or exec search companies, he's exposing himself to a certain risk of people knowing or him, even what I mentioned earlier, losing value because he's trying so hard.
I still debate that because when you say that, losing the value, I don't know. I'm not sure. I think because if you're transparent about what you want and what's happening in life, and you are being straightforward and honest, why do you want that? Why is this happening? Then it's honest, sort of a conversation between friends and business, right? Who are you going to tell other than the executive search, right? Because, of course, you would run a lot higher risk if you choose a strategy of saying, look, I have 5 target companies where I really can't imagine working in. And so I send my CV to in-house recruiting team. That can go south very quickly, right? Because you just don't know where it's going to land, how it's going to be treated. And yes, you can be protected under GDPR, but you cannot be protected from human interaction. And it's so that is the risk you're taking. Whereas if you drop a call or a note of somebody, that particular company, one particular person, does it make sense? Here's my CV. Would you think it makes sense that we meet? And I get many of those, and I said, yeah, why don't we sit down? Right? Sometimes we can help, sometimes we cannot. You should always be able to sort of provide a very honest look at what the things are, what is the reality. And speaking of which, looking at the market today, I tend to provide a dose of sort of a reality check, because the market is tough. Let's face it, and that's not meant to say that there are not opportunities. But you can sense the nervousness on the market where some of the things are being delayed because it takes a little longer to make those decisions. Not every company sees it from the perspective of oh, this is a threat. How are we going to turn it into opportunity? Right? You would see companies hesitating, like, do we change the HR director right now? Because we don't know what's going to happen. If we put a different HR without meeting the people, and then 3 months down the road, we're going to tell the new HR they need to fire 10% of the staff. That's not how you want to start it. So, many of these things are being put on hold. And of course, there are exceptions to the rules. Even this crisis have, some winners on the market. But it's not an easy market. We are in one of the biggest crises in the history of Czech economy, let's face it.
That's exactly what I'm asking. Also, I hope that you won't receive hundreds of CVs after this podcast has been
There is a little bit of a line already, but it's, but it's good. And I mean, if the bloody flu has provided us with something good in 2020, then it certainly gave us the time to reflect. Apart from the time to watch Netflix and HBO shows, I'm sure everybody had sort of a time to read things like, does it make sense what I'm doing, right? Where I'm going to take it next year. I'm going to be 50. Or how does my next decade going to look like, right? And I can tell from some of the conversation, they becoming more in-depth conversation. People sort of let you go into like, hey, here's who I am, here's what I want, instead of like, hey, give me a bigger role, bigger responsibility. So I see these interactions, these conversations a bit more human in terms of that, you now also want to understand why they change it. What does it mean for them, for kids, for family? And people are reflecting on that. And I see something that I like to label it as a human calmness, right? Where they not everybody freaked out in May or March of 2020, but there was a certain level of a panic. Where are we heading? How are we heading? And now we're progressing. there seemed to be a miracle drug. There seemed to be a light at the end of a tunnel.
Right.
The fact that we are messing it up on every potential level in the government is something that you can be, crying about, but there's not much you can do.
Have you ever placed a person in the Czech government?
Nope. Nope. And you know what? And again, I'll be very honest with you. And Egon Zehnder is known for that. That it's not the government. It's typically the public entities that in sophisticated and transparent and fair, I'd say Western Europe or in the Northern Hemisphere, we do that. We work with public institutions. We take a certain pride in helping the most reputable universities to work with the head of the research centers, finding the HR director. How do we, so that those are fantastic things, right? There'll be countries where public sector will own a significant portion of infrastructure companies. But that's a different story. And I don't want to throw everybody in the same basket here. But it's difficult, the environment. So the politics aside, so the ministries, etc. I think where we still have a way to go and get better at is typically public control entities. I honestly believe that those should be high-ranked jobs. Really with reputation and responsibilities. And it still stuns me that typically when you look at where all the issues of a Czech airline started, that should have and wouldn't have not ever happened in sophisticated companies.
Was there, talking about Czech and citizenship and being Czech, was there you became the first Czech to head the Czech office in 2019 or to be a rep for the Czech office. Was there a discussion at Egon about should we make the first Czech the head, or was it in the way of the decision-making process compared to they would like somebody from the outside who would not be influenced by the Czech thinking?
And I wouldn't know. I mean, some of that would come back to me, and I think realistically it was a bit of a coincidence, right? A bit of a luck, and a bit of a mathematics, so to speak, where a couple of things came together, and it became a choice and sort of a calculated risk that the firm was willing to make, and so I never really contemplated on what exactly happened. I think the decision came from sort of electorate that has enough votes and brains to make that decision, and so since that we carry on. It was really funny because if you think about my last name, suddenly the Czech, the first Czech was called German, and so. But that's a joke in a history, and we're actually progressing further. And again, even in the Czech and Slovakian offices in Central Eastern Europe is now governed differently. But that doesn't really change much because there's another specialty about Egon Zehnder. We have a collaborative structure that basically incentivizes us all to work together. Right, and I can't reveal much of the details, but we share the responsibilities for results.
Got it.
And the results are distributed in sort of a fair and equal amount that fosters the collaboration. And it's a great thing to have. Again, coronavirus broke a little bit into that because, of course, we were not able to travel. And some of the international projects, yes, could shift it in the online, but suddenly there was less of a need for that.
Would you say it's impossible to get to Egon Zehnder?
No, it's not. It's not that. It's. And look,
I see you, so I know it's possible. But
I brought a fantastic woman into that, and you probably know. You've heard of Martina, and I told you about her. It's not impossible. It's. I remember when I brought her to the process, said, "Well, just get ready. What's coming?" And by that, I just mean look, you have a 25 interviews ahead of you. With people who spend their life interviewing candidates, and you can only screw once, and you cannot screw majorly. You can have a little flop, right? And she made it, and she's with us, and so are 550 others. So I think it's a mission possible, it has some curriculum limits where even the starting point of the conversation gets a little bit more difficult.
The reason I'm asking, because once I was told it's impossible to get to Goldman Sachs, given it was in Kentucky, which made it very difficult, but I took that as a challenge and it happened. But I understand the level of quality of the interviews or in the performance you have to give. And you say right. I have 2 last questions for this interview. I always ask these questions. One of them is, and I'm thinking how to take it from what angle with you, because, for example, with the president of Slovakia, it was like, what other country would you like to lead if you have the option? With you, I'm contemplating asking you what company you would lead as a CEO, which is the classic question for all of the CEOs I have here, or what company would you like to service or would you like to help from your position of the headhunter. And you being a headhunter right now, I'm going to ask you the latter. Which company, unless you are already working with, like a dream company, you would love working with and put people in that company to run the company better in different way? You basically enjoy having that company as a client.
I'm probably going to disappoint you a little bit because I wouldn't throw a name. Right? For me, it's more of like what they do, how they behave on outside, how they treat sort of a society. And I know there's a CSR format to it, but to me, there has to be a cost. They have to be helping people to get through something, right? And by that, I'm meaning sort of returning them back to nature, being a little bit more authentic than standard selling. So I don't have a name. I really don't. I think that it would probably have to be some of the useful technology. Could be sort of a healthcare that revolutionizes healthcare and would remove typical. I think pharma that goes against untreated diseases, right? And my wife is one of the leaders that stand behind ALS charity. And so if there was a company who invented ALS cure, then go with it. So same thing with cancer. That would be a great thing to do. And on the technology end, I think I work for one that made certain things possible. With the technology,
certainly.
And I think that we just need to be careful with technology. I would almost instantly go into the technology, but then again, there are some ethical disappointments that I have with several of the software giants and typically social media, where I honestly believe that some of the interactions are just breaking up the society. It's not really helpful. It has a good intention, but the end result is not good, and the response is rather slow. So.
And the second question: if there are 2 things you would like to write on a piece of paper, should you disappear tomorrow?
Oh boy!
For the future generations, for some, for them to look at and say, yes, that makes sense. 2 things you live by actually, and you live with. Something that's driving you forward and something important in life that you consider as a pillar for well-being and for happiness.
Has something to do with me being a scientist for a little bit, and I did environmental science. I'll go back to what I saw as a sort of attack, and the attack read, "There's no planet B," and that resonates with me big time. And that could come from any angle. I see a mass tourism going beyond the limits of anything imaginable, and destroying communities and destroying, sort of a habitat. So that is the thing where I say, if we go a little bit backwards in our comfort, let the planet breathe in, breathe out, and sort of go back. So that would be probably the one thing. And the second thing goes right next to it. And I think that, again, is a notion that I see more and more often, where you see people sort of going back to the families and realizing that spending time with your kids has a value, right? So if I see my mission also as an enabler of that, I think that's a mission critical. I think that people should be provided with a little bit of breaks. There should be a flexible working arrangements, not in terms of like, can I work part-time and still deliver 75% of the work content, right? That's not the case, right? Do I take a year break of 6 months because my kids just finished grammar school or they finish high school, they will go to university in the US. I want to spend 3 months traveling with them.
It's interesting. It's interesting to listen to these answers from different people, usually very senior, saying take some time off, be with the family, take vacations, free up your mind of everything else. Great, thank you, Jarda. I want to tell you, you've been always an inspiration, at least for me. I consider you one of the smartest people on the planet. So
now you want me to turn red towards the end of the conversation?
It's my privilege to have you on the podcast. Congratulations on the shift in the career, which is very hard sometimes. Yeah, you're inspiration for people that this can be done. And even though you came from finance, you became a people person, dealing and handling people's desires to live better and to work in different places and have different work-life balance, for example. So really, I appreciate the job you're doing. I appreciate how you think about it. I always appreciate your holistic view on things. There goes your reading and so on. So thank you for coming to the podcast.
Yeah, I was happy to be here. Good to see a friend in somewhat unstructured interview. Hopefully this will turn a few people in the right direction. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for listening, or thank you for watching us on YouTube. You can always reach us at www.theheadhunted.com. It's been a long day. Or shoot me an email, michal@theheadhunted.com. And I'm looking forward to the next podcast, which is, by the way, going to be with another headhunter, Greg Savage. Quite excited about that, and you should be as well. Bye.
Headhunted.